Hey, what's going on everybody? Commander Crane here, and we are back with another Pioneer deck tech, and today we're going to be talking about Golgari, Hulk, and Pioneer. I'm very excited to bring this list to you. As always, at the end of the video, let me know in the comment section below, is there a card that I forgot to put in this deck that definitely should have been there? Or do you have suggestions for upcoming videos? Just let me know in the comment section. So, a little bit of backstory before we hop into this deck here. Okay, so I was going through all the Outlaws of Thunder Junction cards, as I typically do, when a new set comes out. I try to find some different cards that, maybe like helped upgrade a deck in the past, or even create a brand new deck as a whole. So I'm going through all the Outlaws of Thunder Junction cards, and I really haven't looked at a lot of the black cards that were featured in the set. So I'm cruising along, and spoiler alert, I find the card that's here on the thumbnail. And I thought to myself, man, that goes really, really well with a card that used to see a ton of play in Standard, which that card we'll get to in just a moment. But I thought, like, spoiler alert too, I'm like, okay, so they both get cheaper as there's more creatures in the graveyard. Let's go and build like a self-mill, creature matters graveyard deck. So I called the deck Golgari Hulk because that's what they called it when it was a deck in Standard. So, I couldn't find a clever name for it, so I just still wanted to call it Golgari Hulk. So let's go and let's look at the cards here. Okay, so it's based off of Molder Hulk here, which is 7 green black, costs 1 less to cast for each creature card in your graveyard, and when it enters the battlefield, return target land card from your graveyard to the battlefield. So Molder Hulk was like the engine of the deck back in the day. You fill your graveyard with a ton of different creature cards, have a really, really cheap Molder Hulk, and you just like outvalue your opponent. But we got Hollow Marauder, a new card from Outlaws of Thunder Junction that works really, really well with Molder Hulk and is arguably better as well. It's 6 in a black, costs 1 less to cast for each creature card in your graveyard with flying. When it enters the battlefield, any number of target opponents each discard a card. For each of those opponents who didn't discard a card with mana value 4 or greater, draw a card. So I really, really love Hollow Marauder in this deck. We have 8 effects now that get really, really cheap as we fill up our graveyard with more creatures. So those are the two main, not engines, but the best cards in the deck. The other card that benefits from getting creature cards in the graveyard is Urborg Lurgoyf. We're playing 4 copies of it. It has kicker blue and or black. Spoiler alert, we're not going to be paying the blue for the kicker, but it doesn't matter because we have the kicker for the black, which is nice. And then as it enters the battlefield, mill 3 cards for each time it was kicked. And then its power is equal to the number of creature cards in your graveyard, and its toughness is equal to that number plus 1. So huge fan of Urborg Lurgoyf. It's going to get really, really big in this deck. So let's go and check out all the ways that we're going to fill up our graveyard with creatures, which coincidentally, a lot of those creatures fill up the graveyard themselves. So we're playing 4 copies of Stitcher Supplier and 2 copies of Gnawing Vermin as our 1-drops that fill our graveyard. Stitcher Supplier is fantastic because obviously when it enters or dies, we mill 3, which is really sweet. Gnawing Vermin only mills 2. It does target player, but we're still going to be targeting ourselves with it. And then when it dies, target creature you don't control gets -1/-1 until end of turn. So, potentially can trade with a 2-drop, which is just pretty solid. We're also playing 4 copies of Satyr Wayfinder, classic way to fill our graveyard. Reveal the top 4, put a land card into our hand, and then put the rest into the graveyard. So, huge fan of Satyr Wayfinder. And again, pretty much all the ways that we're looking to mill ourselves is with creatures, just because obviously if we play, for instance, like Grisly Salvage, it itself is not a creature, so, sometimes it's not quite as good. So it makes sense here, especially because, the first slide, we want creatures in our graveyard. All right, next slide here. We're playing 2 copies of Mire Triton. I really like this card. 2 mana, 2/1 with Death Touch. And then when it enters, we mill 2 and gain 2. So Mire Triton trades with any creature. It's surprisingly really annoying. I've played against a lot of different, graveyard, self-mill graveyard decks. And Mire Triton is always really annoying just because they always trade with one-way creatures. So huge fan of Mire Triton. We're playing 4 copies of Order of Midnight. So this is kind of like a late rendition for this deck, but I really like it. So obviously, like the creature side, 2/2 for 2 flyer, it can't block, which isn't crazy exciting. It is a creature though, for when we mill all of our creatures. But the main reason we're playing it is because of the Alter Fate has the adventure side of it. Return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. Essentially, if we mill any of our Molder Hulks and such, we can buy them back with Alter Fate. So that's why we're playing the Order of Midnight. And once again, it's a creature, so if we mill it, it helps our other creatures get bigger. So that's why we're playing the Order of Midnight. Our last creature I want to talk about in this deck, which I don't really consider it so much a creature as I do a land, but we're playing 4 Kazandu Mammoth. The black side is just a tap land that enters and it taps for green, but when it's in the graveyard or any zone except for in play as Kazandu Mammoth or as a land, it counts as Kazandu Mammoth. So essentially, if we're milling ourselves, it's just really just a land that counts as a creature when it's in the graveyard. So that's why we're playing the 4 Kazandu Mammoths. And you want to know what? It's not a bad creature to cast. I mean, it's a 3/3 for 3. We play a land. It's a 5/5. I really do like Kazandu Mammoth. So that's why we're also playing 4 copies of that. And then rounding out the deck, we are playing 4 Creeping Chill. I've always wanted to play this deck in a Pioneer deck, but, you know, could never really find the right deck for it. And guess what? We're milling ourselves. Why don't we just play the Creeping Chill? Sure, it's not a creature, but getting a free Lightning Helix is pretty darn solid. So, huge fan of Creeping Chill. And then our removal spells that we're playing 4 Fatal Push and 2 Assassin's Trophy as our main sources of removal. So that's the entire deck except for the lands. Let's go ahead and talk about those real quick, which it's pretty simple. We're playing 4 Blooming Marsh, 4 Overgrown Tomb, and 4 Darkbore Pathway as our main dual lands. We're also playing 2 copies of Hive of the Eye Tyrant, 1 Boseiju, and 1 Takenuma. You know, why don't we play the channel lands? They're basically free. Huge fan of Takenuma in this deck, though, just because it does mill us 3, and then we can return a creature or planeswalker, which, not that we're going to be returning a planeswalker ever with it, but huge fan of the Takenuma. And then rounding out our lands, we're playing 1 Forest and 1 Mountain, and as our spicy basic land of the day, I decided to feature a couple of really sweet, you know, forests and plains from the Return to Ravnica set. I really like the forest. You know, you got like the lush there. Kind of reminds me of the Golgari. I don't think that's a Selesnya one though. It looks very Golgari-like, but I really like the swamp though. There was a couple different swamp arts in this set I liked, but this one was the one that I liked the most, so that's why I featured that one. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about our sideboard as well as some budget options. So sideboarding is really simple. We're going to want some Graveyard Hate. Bunch of different cards you could play. Personally, I would recommend Tormod's Crypt or Cling to Dust, just because Cling to Dust is nice. If we mill it, we can escape it later, but it does potentially mean getting rid of our creatures, though, so be a little careful with the Cling to Dust. But I really suggest playing some Graveyard Hate with this current metagame. Again, we're going to want some extra removal. It's really up to you what you want to play. I personally recommend some more Assassin's Trophies. You could play some Go for the Throats. Really, it's up to you for the most part, whatever you want to play. And then Vampire Hate. I highly recommend playing some copies of Pick Your Poison, just because being able to get rid of the, forgetting the name of it all of a sudden, the Vein Ripper is really important. You could also play a couple Pithing Needles as well. The last thing I want to mention is artifact and enchantment removal. We're going to want to be playing some of that in our sideboard because we're playing a graveyard deck. If our opponent sees us playing all of our Molder Hulks and stuff and killing them really fast, they're going to bring in like Rest in Peace and Tormod's Crypts and, you know, things like that. So maybe even some ley lines. So make sure you're playing some spells in the sideboard that can get rid of artifacts and enchantments. You could play Abrupt Decay. That's personally what I would recommend. The only downside to that is then if they have a ley line, we can't destroy the ley line with the Abrupt Decay, but we are already playing Assassin's Trophy, which can obviously remove the ley line. So just keep that in mind. Opponents are going to be bringing in Graveyard Hate. So just be ready for that. Sideboard in, next level, bring in the hate for the hate. And the last thing we have to talk about here is the budget options, which before we mention the budget options here, I want to say that I originally built this deck as a budget deck. I decided to feature the non-budget deck here, but when I originally was constructing this, it was with the budget list in mind. And part of that is because essentially with the budget and non-budget deck, we're playing the exact same creatures. There's no creatures that are too pricey for us, so we didn't put in the budget deck. The only difference is the dual lands and the utility lands and some sideboard cards like Thoughtseize, for instance. Other than that, the deck is the exact same, which is really sweet, which the deck list is in the description below if you want to check it out. But I believe the budget list as we built it is like $52, so you can easily get it to under 50. I think we're also playing like still the Fatal Push and the Assassin's Trophies, so you can play a few budget alternatives to get it under $50. But the one thing I want to mention is the upgraded list is only $195 as it's constructed right now, because again, you know, it's like Thoughtseize in the sideboard, and then we're also playing, you know, the Overgrown Tombs and the Beseiju and that kind of thing. This deck is extremely cheap for a fun Pioneer deck. The last thing I want to mention, and this is a fantastic budget option for Explore. There's not a lot of rares in this deck. You know, not including the dual lands, of course. Like, for instance, like Urborg Lurgoyf is one of them. Assassin's Trophy is another one. But you can pretty easily substitute those out and just play a sweet common and uncommon, like, self-mill Golgari deck. So I wanted to mention that as well. I usually don't mention that, but the deck is mostly commons and uncommons. At least the core is. So definitely very, very sweet. So that takes us to the end of the video here. Thanks so much for watching. The deck lists are in the description below if you'd like to check them out for yourself. Huge shout out to our channel members, Ralph, Matt, Arcadius, and Ray. If you are interested in being a channel member, it's only $1 US a month. Gets you access to the exclusive Discord as well as other features here on the channel. So thanks so much for watching this video. Let me know in the comment section below, what do you think about the deck? Is there a card that I should have included that I did not? Just let me know in the comment section. So I'm Commander Crane. Thanks for watching this video, and I'll catch you in the next one.